What do people oftentimes misunderstand about cremation?
I think they think the biggest misunderstanding is that the final decision is just cremate me
Mhm.
and not worry about where those cremated remains go and don't talk about that. We made that mistake in my family. My dad was clear, just cremate me. I don't want you to grieve, daughter of mine. I don't want you to be sad. Guess what? I was sad when my dad died, right? I mourned him. Cremation did not remove that from me. And even I, who should have known better, because I was working with Cana at that time, didn't have the conversation with him. Well, do you want to be scattered? Do you want to be in a cemetery? Well, like, what happens after that decision to cremate? So that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that the choice of disposition, cremation itself, is the only decision that needs to be made.
This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end of life tasks.
Barbara Kemmis is the executive director of the Cremation Association of North America, where she leads initiatives in education, member programs, and strategic partnerships that shape the future of cremation. That's right. There is an interesting future that we're going to get into when it regards to cremation. She has over 25 years of experience in association leadership. She's passionate about bringing people together to advance common goals. And under her leadership, Cana has played a pivotal role in educating both professionals and the public about cremation, its evolution, and its place in the future of funeral service. If there's anybody you want to talk to about cremation in the country, it is definitely Barbara. Barbara, it's great to have you.
Thanks, Adam. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it. I'm psyched
Yeah,
for our conversation.
yeah, I'm gonna go and travel with you. I can just do it on beat.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's hop in. Before we actually talk about cremation, before we talk about Cana, I'd love to learn a little bit about you. What's your background? How did you find yourself in the role? Is this something that you grew up as a kid going, you know what, this is my calling, or is it something you kind of fell into later on in life?
Oh, absolutely. Every child grows up to be an association or dreams of association executive roles right now. No, not at all. I was going to be a lawyer. That was the only way to get out of my small town upbringing, right? And make money in the big city. And that's not what I did either. I'm actually a librarian by trade. I love research. I love cite my sources, be prepared. So, and I love describing, business or whatever profession I represent in order to make data-driven decisions, right? That's what my members really want. So as a librarian, I started out in a library that was owned by an association, and we supported nonprofit organizations, grant making, fundraising, those kinds of things. And but most of my job was unsticking the copier way back then and directing people to the bathroom, and that got a little boring. So I decided, do I want to stay in libraries, associations, what have you? I chose associations, went to a national library association, and then I wanted to be an executive director. And I thought, hey, I haven't done a job interview in 7 years. Let's try this Cremation Association of North America. Isn't that hilarious? There's an association for everything. And 14 years later, here I am. So there we go.
Amazing. For
Yeah.
those of you that aren't familiar with the level of associations in DC, there is actually an association of association
Oh,
executives.
I belong. Absolutely.
There you go. So you had a burning desire to switch careers and jump into the Cremation Association, pun intended. You probably learned a little bit about the background of cremation in the United States. Let's take a step back. Let's go back to the 1870s and go from there to today.
Sure. Here's the quick history. Modern cremation in the United States, meaning a building with a purpose built equipment or incineration oven, started with the first cremation in 1876 in Washington, Pennsylvania. And that means that 2026, next year, is the sesquicentennial of cremation. We're gearing up to celebrate 150 years of modern cremation in the United States. And the distinction between modern cremation is, again, that equipment, because disposition of bodies by fire have been around forever. There's a long history of that. Burial was first, for sure, but disposition by fire or pyre or that kind of thing must have come second. In the United States, it was immigrants who brought it, European immigrants. Fascination with cremation as a beautiful disposition, as a hygienic disposition. Embalming was brand new as well and not quite as well practiced as it is now as far as actually preserving the body and preventing disease. So it really started in Germany and in Great Britain a few years before coming to the United States. And then fast forward 100 years to 1972, the national cremation rate was what? 5%. It was barely practiced. There were very, very few. Well, there were very many crematories. Cana was founded in 1913 by roughly 40 cemeteries. That's where crematories were located then exclusively on cemetery property throughout the US and Canada. And they came together with this, kind of to evangelize. I mean, there was a lot of cremation propaganda, purified by fire, the soul being released in the cremation chamber and by the process. Beautiful poetry was written at that time, and there was a lot of intersection of reform movements. There were some very well-known suffragettes, excuse me, who promoted cremation as well. So all this reform work was kind of intermingled in the late 19th century into the early 20th century. And then it became more professionalized, more centered first on cemetery property. And then in maybe the 50s and 60s, funeral homes started having crematories, and then cremation societies began, and more reform work happened around funeral service. Jessica Mitford, very famous reporter who wrote The American Way of Death, kind of demystified some of the practices. And so, yeah, more interest, kind of new traditions, a desire for new traditions, almost do it yourself, right? Do I really need somebody doing this for me, or turning over all control to somebody else? That kind of attitude changed. So from 1972 to 2016, cremation really expanded and exceeded 50% of dispositions in the United States. And that's roughly my lifetime.
What's the current stat percentage-wise in the country today?
Yeah, we're gathering data for 2024, but the 2023 stat was 60.6%. And nationally, cremation increases of roughly, 1.5% a year. So yeah, it's well over 60%.
So it seems like the Barbara age of leading Cana was much more effective than the initial 50 to 60 years of the organization, where it went in literally 50, 60 years, it went from 0% effectively to 5%. And then the next 50 years, it grew an additional 50% plus. Is that
Yeah.
right?
And it's all because of my tiny association.
Yeah,
Absolutely. No,
absolutely.
in all seriousness, Adam, it's 100% consumer driven.
Mhm.
And from an association perspective, it's my members who are the funeral directors and cemetery managers who are serving the grieving families who are making these decisions. And we as an association are just trying to keep up with them and produce benefits and resources that help them. So it's really been running to keep up and describe and understand why this trend has taken place.
Let's go in two different paths. The first path, I want to talk about consumer perception of cremation. And then I definitely want to put you on the spot and get into the business of cremation, because I think that's something that a lot of people, a lot of listeners have zero understanding of what that looks like. Consumer perception, though, how has it changed over time? Have you seen any trends in the time that you've been with the organization? What do people have in misconceptions? So let's see where you take that.
Interesting. I think cremation appeals to consumers for many reasons, but some trends that have encouraged it are we don't live where we grew up as much anymore. We're more of a transient population. And in those parts of the country where more people live where they grow up, burial rates are higher, right? Like, so you have that tie to the community. So if you're moving away for work or education or love, and you're going to move multiple times in your life, you're going to be less tied to one physical space and one cemetery. And so that transience, right, that moving around has led to cremation being a really good solution. Even, retiring far away from where you raised your family or where your ancestors lived. Also, there's this notion of possession that I think cremation supports. So especially in deaths like one spouse dies before the other spouse. Well, I'm just, my dad died before my mom, and his urn is in my mother's bedroom, right? She's going to keep him with her, and then after she dies, apparently they're moving in with me. So that's the plan. I get to make the decision. And that's probably going to resonate with a lot of your listeners. That's a common thing. Sadly, when children die before their parents, right? That's never the normal way of things. Parents should not outlive their children. It happens, and they want to keep their kids with them. We've been through and continue to be involved in many wars and military things where soldiers die young, and those parents or young spouses want to keep them with them, right? It's well known with the Veterans Affairs that like people aren't being placed in cemeteries immediately; they're staying in homes. In fact, Cana research shows that 26% of U.S. households have human cremated remains under their rooftop now. Yes, it's a common thread of a story after wildfires or floods or other natural disasters. They want to get back in, yes, to find photos, but also to find the urns of their people who are under the rooftop. And that's such a dramatic, you wouldn't take a casket with a body home with you. You would never think of that, right? They
Yeah.
go to cemeteries. So, but that's both appealing and I'm hinting at future problems. And the third thing is that we are becoming less affiliated with traditions or religion. Plurality of Americans are nuns, right? NONES. They don't subscribe to any kind of religious background at all. So they're creating their own traditions around this. And cremation, supports that. It's not necessary. There's a few religions it's tied to and mandated, a few where it's rarely practiced, if ever.
Mhm.
But for the most part, you can make of it what you want. You can make your new traditions.
What do people oftentimes misunderstand about cremation?
I think they think the biggest misunderstanding is that the final decision is just cremate me
Hmm.
and not worry about where those cremated remains go and don't talk about that. We made that mistake in my family. My dad was clear, just cremate me. I don't want you to grieve, daughter of mine. I don't want you to be sad. Guess what? I was sad when my dad died, right? I mourned him. Cremation did not remove that from me. And even I, who should have known better, because I was working with Cana at that time, didn't have the conversation with him. Well, do you want to be scattered? Do you want to be in a cemetery? Like, what happens after that decision to cremate? So that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that the choice of disposition, cremation itself, is the only decision that needs to be made.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, in terms of cremation itself, it's no longer a single process. If you ask somebody about
Mm.
cremation 10, 15 years ago, they'd probably go, big box, oven, fire, ouch, right?
Hmm.
Tongue in cheek a bit. But today, it's changed. There's newer cremation technologies
Yeah,
like alkaline hydrolysis, which is a confusing word for a lot of people to remember. They're not going to walk into a facility and be like, you know what? I'd like to sign up for that.
it sounds lovely, doesn't it?
It really
Yeah.
does. So the nicer word is water cremation or aquamation. What are the different options, and can you explain what it traditionally is? Firewood versus gas versus this as it's evolved into the new approaches.
Absolutely. And I'll get a little wonky with the laws because laws create definitions too, right? So
Yeah.
basically in the 80s and 90s, burial was always permitted just because. And then cemeteries formed and there were laws governing where some, zoning or those kinds of laws governing where cemeteries could be. But it wasn't until the 80s and 90s when cremation started becoming more practiced that laws formed, not necessarily to legalize cremation, but to define how the work of what cremation was and how
Mhm.
it could be practiced and who or which establishment could be licensed to practice that. And once those laws were on the books, it was the common path for new forms of disposition to be legalized as a form of cremation, right? Not a form of burial. There are basically two legal dispositions. And from a consumer perspective, I'm not a funeral director, right? I'm a librarian, so I'm still like, come on, why do you have to tell me this? It's practice. Why does it have to become legal? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's the answer.
Okay.
So most states for alkaline hydrolysis followed the path of changing the definition of cremation to include not just flame and fire or incineration, but chemical reaction and heat. And the chemical reaction does raise the temperature of the water, nowhere near the heat that's involved in flame cremation. So when you think about it, purpose-built equipment and vessel generating heat to various degrees in a building, speeding up decomposition, returning cremated remains or ashes to the family. It's similar, right? So
Mhm.
that's why they're both considered to be cremation. We choose the term alkaline hydrolysis because it is the chemical, unsexy but accurate term. And other forms of terms like resomation or aquamation are actually trademarked by the manufacturers of the machines, But water cremation seems to be what most people describe it as.
Is the duration of the process similar?
Somewhat similar. Cremation takes anywhere from, I would say, 1.5 to 3, maybe 4 hours from beginning to end, cool down, removal of the bone fragments
Mhm.
to be processed and returned. And alkaline hydrolysis has a wider time span. It's more like 4 to 24 hours. And there's a reason why. You can increase the pressure and raise the temperature of the water to speed up decomposition. But unlike flame cremation, there is a drying period after water cremation before the bones can be pulverized and returned in an urn. So, yeah.
Talk about that. I don't think a lot of people realize that it's a multi-stage process. So you have the
hmm
flame, you have the alkaline hydrolysis process. At the end of that, you have bones that are left in the vessel. Can you talk about that and what happens to the bones after?
Yeah, actually, that's the first thought I had when you asked me what do people not know about cremation because pop culture proliferates this. What's left in the vessel, whether it's flame or water cremation, is a skeleton, pretty much a full skeleton. Any DNA is gone because the flame has, or the chemical reaction has reduced all of that flesh, muscle, bone marrow, etc., to to just the bone fragments. So we're talking about primarily calcium phosphate is left over. Also in implants, so if there's any metal implants or plastic or silicone implants, they remain. The clothing is pretty much gone unless there's snaps or zippers or steel-toed boots. True story.
Mhm.
And any other keepsakes that are put in there. And by the way, please, please, no matter how much you love your person, be cautious about what you put in the container prior to cremation. Bottles of liquor, ammunition, not welcomed by the crematory operator, not safe. I laugh, but it happens all the time. I mean, do put in keepsakes and things. That's fine, but please be aware of where that's going to end up. So those remains, so that are anywhere from dust to recognizable bones and fragments, are swept out of the chamber, removed from the chambers, and processed or pulverized in a purpose-built machine.
Mhm.
And you don't have to do that. In some cultures, especially Asian cultures and traditions, you wouldn't reduce the bones. Like if you're cremated in Japan or China, no, the bones would not be reduced to ash. But that's the tradition here, and that's what most state laws say. They have to be reduced to an eighth of an inch or smaller,
Mhm. Mhm.
so you can scatter.
Mhm. Now, when people think of cremation, again, we've gone through the evolution now to alkaline hydrolysis. Are there other innovations that are happening in the space too, or is that the big one that's here and that's going to be the big innovation for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
No, there's a big one coming down the the pike that was actually conceived and developed in, well, I'm going to say the late 90s, and then first in place in Washington State in 2020, and that's another fun term, natural organic reduction, which most people consider to be human composting. And there are now 4 primary practitioners in Washington, Colorado, and Nevada.
Okay.
And interestingly, in Nevada, it was legalized as a form of cremation. So we can get to that in a second. But the concept of human composting is a structure, a purpose-built vessel. The body is added with organic content or organic material, the anaerobic and other bacteria that present in the body and fed by the compost speeds up decomposition, reduces the body and the bones to soil fundamentally. And so there's no DNA or disease present afterwards. The implants or anything else are filtered out of it. And it's been practiced for about 5 years in the United States, but it's legal in 12 states now.
And that's considered cremation too.
Legally, to my mind, and to the regulators who license practitioners, are kind of shaking their head. The process couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to those laws on the books. It's easier to change a definition and make it legal and then leave the agencies to write the rules and that determine who gets licenses, et cetera.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Going back to the statement that you made about don't put things into the vessel because there can
Yeah.
be unintended consequences. Some things are just there. I mean, you may
hmm
have gold filling in your tooth.
Yep.
What happens?
So the metals, the cremation metals, or any really anything that is not bone fragments, is the standard practice is to recycle it.
Hmm.
Okay. And the funds that are generated from, say, gold fillings or more valuable metals, frankly, and bridge work, et cetera, that come from that, usually it's up to the business who does that, but usually they make charitable donations back to the community. A lot of hospice organizations benefit from this. It's entirely up to the cremation business how they do that.
Hmm.
But the standard practice is recycling because those are titanium hips and other metals can go back into the cycle and be reused for different things. Pacemakers are removed ahead of time. Anything that's an implant that has a battery attached to it is typically removed by an embalmer prior to cremation. You don't want those things exploding in the
Yeah.
chamber either. And in some cases, those implants can be reused. Most often, they're recycled and sent back to the manufacturer.
Have you heard of strange stories or things that are surprising that have happened during the process that you can share?
Oh my gosh, all the time. Like I see, I mean, if there's an association for everything, there's 3 Facebook groups for everybody, right? So my favorite is when I follow about crematory operators, and they'll post a picture of like, what is this? Like, where could this have possibly come from? And more often than not, it's some kind of pin or other structure to support a bone that has healed but was
Hmm.
broken, or some kind of surgical implant like that. But often, I swear in this job, I learn about, like, I didn't know this. I didn't know there was a battery powered implant for sleep apnea. Did you know that? If you don't want to wear your CPAP machine, there's a solution for that. You can have an implant in your skull. Apparently, I'm not recommending this
Yeah.
at all to anyone. But how did I find this out? One of my members said, "What is this?" I pulled this out of the chamber. So sometimes we learn about medical advancements this way too.
So is one of the processes that people go through is running people through a metal detector beforehand?
Oh, good question. So whenever someone dies in the United States, and while laws vary state by state because this is really regulated at a state level, you're going to be working with a funeral director. And there's almost without exception, you'll be working with a funeral director, and the funeral director will ask questions of your, person with the right to control disposition, your next of kin, sometimes it's referred to. A standard question is, do you have any implants? How did you die? Were there radioactive implants or treatments? Those kinds of things. So that's a standard question.
Like if somebody asked me that about a loved one, parents, maybe I don't have their full medical history.
Hmm.
What if I don't know?
Some people are very private and hide it from even their closest relatives, or they died of a heart attack, but you didn't know they had prostate cancer treatment, 3 weeks before with radioactive seeds implanted. So sometimes you just don't know. It's not required, mind you, but many crematory operators opt into having a handheld metal
Yep.
detector wand that
Mhm.
they'll run over the container, the casket that the person's in, and see if there's any metal inside. But typically, it's the funeral director and embalmer who screens for that kind of thing before the body goes to the cremator.
Mhm.
Now, God forbid there is a pacemaker still implanted or a larger battery operated implant still there. You know what happens? The battery explodes and there's a
Yeah.
loud noise. And is the operator hurt? No. Is a nick out of the brick refractory in the chamber? Possibly. So the risk of actual operator harm is low, I would say, but it's still worth avoiding, obviously. Yeah.
Okay.
You only cremate things that are combustible.
Mhm.
So putting in stuffed animals or certain clothing that might be plastic, like that's not going to release good chemicals into the air post combustion, right? Let's just, it's useful to be intentional about that. And sometimes what people will do is they'll place things at the service, right? I want to place these roses. Roses are fine, obviously, but these animals in the casket with my person at the service, but maybe allow for them to be removed prior to cremation. Hmm.
Wow, there's so much. Alright, so switching over to the business side because I wanna be
Yeah.
mindful of time as well. It's a business. I remember during COVID, I was traveling for work at the time, and I was in Brussels meeting with someone, and they were from government, and they said that the cost of gas was going up so much, and this was COVID during the time of the Ukraine invasion as well,
Hmm.
Ukraine war, that some of the bakeries and crematoriums were having problems because their cost of goods was skyrocketing so much.
Yes.
People are going to lose bread and stop cremating. That was surprising to me. I don't think that I realized some of the economics in the business. Give us a crash course. Somebody wants to start a crematorium, or somebody that has a funeral parlor wants to get into the business. What's their 3 to 4 minute, this is what you need to know and consider, because if you don't, you're going to miss not the boat, but you'll miss the yacht.
Yeah. Well, the first thing to know is that by and large in the United States, there's about 3,700 licensed crematories in the United States right now. Various numbers in various states, usually closer to population centers. Makes sense, right? The market determines the need for these things. But where they're placed, they can't be, zoning comes into effect, right? And while cremation rates have increased and people are choosing cremation more often than not, they do not want to see that crematory or know that that crematory is anywhere near where they breathe air, live, go to school, whatever. And so the not in my backyard opposition to new and expanded crematory placement is strong. So that's an interesting dichotomy because cremation equipment is quite safe, especially if you're, that's why I keep saying, be aware of what you're cremating, right? Let's avoid plastics. And then guess what? We won't incinerate plastics and breathe the outcome of that. Almost always, a crematorium must be owned by or licensed as a funeral establishment. So the people involved probably need to be licensed funeral directors or work with licensed funeral directors. In the case when they're on cemetery property, that there's purpose-built facilities, the zoning is less of an issue, but you do need to hire and train people. About half the country requires crematory operator certification. And so that's a career path for many, a kind of entry path for many into this.
What's the certification body?
Full disclosure, Cana started doing it 40 years ago. We continue to offer that certification. We're not the only ones there. But as far as who's requiring the certification and inspecting whether operators are certified and trained, that would be the state funeral boards.
Okay.
Yeah. So we provide the education that covers the topics the states and provinces require. So there's, every state's just a little bit different. It's hard to generalize, but I do get approached by people who are like, hey, people are dying and I've got money to invest in this. And, those baby boomers, 15 years going to be peak baby boomer death. And yes, we're all really well aware of that. So how can I get in on those quick and fast? And there is no quick and fast way because we're talking about zoning, we're talking about licensing, sometimes an educational degree in some cases. So it's you got to really want it. There's a path forward though.
Let's put on our hat. We're going to open up the Kemmis Zuckerman Funeral Home establishment in Acme, Illinois. Right. We fortunately already have our license. We're zoned properly. We're acquiring the facility from somewhere else who's been in the community for quite some time, and they didn't want to go to one of the roll-ups that are happening right now in the industry.
You've done your homework.
Yeah. But unfortunately, they have not really dabbled into the cremation side of things yet, which is one of the reasons why they went out of business or had to sell. They weren't competitive. And we decided that we want to actually do that. What are the costs? So is this something that you're financing? Is this out of pocket? Is it a lease back? Do you own the equipment? What are the economics?
All of those things are possible, but typically you would own it, and it's a significant capital investment. You need, let's say you have a garage that's zoned appropriately for this. It has electrical connections, but you need to run a gas line, you need to run a water line, you need to do those kinds of things. Okay, you can do that. You can purchase the equipment. You can actually purchase used cremators and refurbish them, or a brand new high capacity one. So the range there is probably somewhere between $75,000 and $250,000, depending on your business model. What kind of volume are you looking at? So if you're going to do 150 to 300 cremations, you don't need maybe, the highest level one. You want a middle of the road one. I'm trying really hard to not make analogies to cars, but you can see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, let's talk about this different level of tiers. Instead of using cars, let's use grills. You can get a grill that you just dump your charcoal in and you close the top and that's it. Or you can get a grill now that has automatic temperature, automation regulation that, will send an app notification to your phone when the, brisket's done, if that's what you're cooking on it. Is that the type of differentiation that we're talking about in this type of technology, or is it a little bit more generic?
I think that's a really good analogy. Yeah, as far as the technology goes, but then you got to layer on the business model of the services provided. So
Mhm.
let's say Acme, Illinois is actually suburban Chicago, and Chicago, by statute, does not allow crematories in the city limits. So around the surrounding suburbs, there are a number of cremation businesses that cremate for all the funeral homes in the city of Chicago. Well, we want to specialize in maybe the Hindu community, and we're going to build out this beautiful viewing area where they can have all the food and celebration they want to have. And that's what we're going to specialize in, and we're going to target those communities. Or maybe we're just going to do high volume, nobody ever sets foot in the building. All the services happen at the funeral homes, but the
Right.
cremations happen here. Or maybe we're right in the middle and we want to, we want to build out this beautiful space where we can have small family gatherings, witness cremations, and then we can do other cremations too. So you layer in the services in there, and it changes things a little bit too.
Okay. Now let's go back to the personal side of things.
Hmm.
I live in Illinois. Theoretically, we found our new Chemist Zuckerman facility. We
Hmm.
absolutely love it. I want to make things super easy on my family and pre-plan. Can you pre-plan cremation? Is there pre-need cremation insurance as well? Or is this a nope,
Absolutely.
this is something you got to do later?
Yeah, there's probably, I would say a few categories to look at. You can absolutely go to a cremation provider. And by the way, any funeral home can arrange for a cremation. Doesn't have to be in the name. Any funeral home can arrange for cremation for you. So let's say you want to go there and you want to say, oftentimes this happens when you're arranging
Mhm.
for a cremation or a funeral for somebody else. You'll be asked, do you want to make arrangements yourself? And it's kind of top of mind, it's convenient, all of that. You can do so. You can prepay in cash, and that cash goes into a trust you can make payments over time, and that also money goes into a trust that is invested and highly regulated. You can take
Mhm.
out an insurance policy, as you said, either through the funeral home or not. If you have an insurance policy dedicated through another provider or a bank account that you've set aside for this purpose, at the time of your death, your your heirs, your people can assign that insurance policy or bank account to cover your end of life expenses. There's even more wonderful, I think, and I hope these happen, public policy ideas around expanding the use of HSA accounts or
Mhm.
529 education accounts to also cover end of life expenses. Wouldn't that be cool? These are tax advantage savings that
Yeah.
you can control and that sort of thing. So, really, the important thing is to talk about what you want to do. Don't keep this to yourself. If you talk about death, you're not going to die any quicker. But your people around you will know what you want and can honor those wishes.
All right. One or two more questions, and then I know that we're out of time for today. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Um, Cost. So how much does
Hmm.
it typically cost? Does it matter where you live? Does it matter how much you weigh?
It matters less about what you weigh. Well, I'll get to that. So cost varies widely, and it does matter where you die. It does matter or where you live, and then eventually die. It does matter on because there's just so many variables. So if you distill it down to the disposition itself, let's say you're just choosing what's referred to as direct cremations. Any services, celebration of life, ultimate scattering or placement in a cemetery happens later. You're just looking at that. Then you're still going to get a variety of prices. And the key is that some providers say, here's our basically our package price, everything inclusive, right? And that's going to be a slightly larger dollar amount per se than the billboard that says cremation, you know, $3, three numbers behind a dollar sign. But with that, you're going to be paying a lot of fees. You're going to be paying mileage, refrigeration, possibly if you're a person of size, a little bit more if you weigh more. So it's just a business model you're comfortable with. And that's why planning ahead, if not even paying ahead, just planning ahead makes a lot of sense. Do that research, maybe around the time you're researching hospice options, right? Maybe well before then, so you know who you trust and who fits your needs.
All
But
right.
shop around, absolutely.
Barbara Kemmis, you are a wealth of information. I have a feeling that we're probably going to be coming back to you with a few questions in time. It's clear that
Anytime, Adam, we've got this funeral home going. Like, let's see what we
I
can do with
know
it.
we've got the whole business and all the spin-offs as well. We didn't even get into pet cremation, which is
Oh,
which
that's
is
a
a
whole
whole
other
thing.
thing, right?
That's another episode for a different information hub. pet legacy and care. But it's clear that Cana is shaping the future of cremation. It's important that consumers and those that are running the services have the best education, ethical guidance, and knowledge of the evolutions in the technology and the industry. So thank you for sharing your insights.
Thanks.
If people want to learn more about Cana, get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Online is great. Our website is www.cremationassociation.org. We have so much information about planning ahead and finding Cana members and reaching me directly, probably through the website. I'm not on social media much these days, but I dip in every once in a while. So all the staff at Cana would love to hear from you and answer your questions.
All right, Barbara, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at buriedinwork.com.